Saturday night at Horizon, one of Nashville's most upscale restaurants, was always chaotic. Kyle was already used to the pressure. As a waiter for nearly 3 years, he had learned to quickly identify customers and adjust his service accordingly. In his mind, those who came in a suit demanded impeccable service and expensive wines, while tourists ordered something not much different from what they had at home. And then there were those customers he mentally classified as irrelevant, those who didn't seem to fit the profile of the people who truly belonged in that place. It was an unspoken game, an instinct he believed he had developed to anticipate each table's expectations. That night, the dining room was full. The clatter of cutlery and glasses blended with the ambient music, creating a refined background sound. Kyle, carrying a notepad and trying to hide his fatigue, stopped in front of a new table. A group of 4 people, apparently on an informal meeting, occupied the space. Among them was a middle-aged man, dressed in a dark blue cotton shirt and wearing a discreet watch. He wasn't wearing a tie, shiny shoes, or any obvious signs that he was someone important. Kyle immediately classified him as an ordinary customer, perhaps one of those who order an inexpensive dish to share and spend hours occupying the table. Kyle did what he always did. He smiled automatically and asked if the group already knew what to order. The first 3 customers chose their dishes without delay, demonstrating familiarity with the restaurant's refined menu. The last one, the man in the understated blue shirt, scanned the menu calmly, as if he were pondering. The time he took bothered Kyle, who was already impatient with the pace of the night. Driven by the desire to speed up the service, the waiter made a light but condescending remark. "You seem like a salad kind of guy. If you want, I can suggest something more elaborate." He expected a laugh, maybe a knowing look from the other customers, but all he received was a neutral look from the man and a brief nod. He simply replied, "I think I want the steak, medium." The comment did not seem to cause a big reaction, and Kyle moved on without thinking too much about what he had said. To him, it was just an attempt to break the ice and keep the interaction quick and efficient. The restaurant demanded that kind of agility, and he was there to serve, not to create deep connections. However, when he returned to the table minutes later to confirm the order, something in the atmosphere seemed different. The other customers at the table appeared more attentive to the man in the blue shirt, as if they had noticed something Kyle hadn't perceived. Still, the waiter didn't bother to reconsider his attitude. To him, he was just another ordinary customer among many. Kyle returned to the bar, where the chefs were working frantically to keep the kitchen on schedule. While waiting for the orders to be ready, he noticed one of the managers, Ethan, walking through the dining room with a watchful look. Ethan rarely interfered with the service unless something important was happening. Kyle casually followed his path until he saw him stop right at the table of the man in the blue shirt. The manager smiled respectfully, greeted him with a firm handshake, and performed a brief, discreet bow, as if he were in the presence of someone far above his rank. The other nearby employees noticed the scene and one by one began to show the same deference. It was at that moment that Kyle felt a strange unease. This was not just any customer. He saw Ethan exchange a few friendly words with the man, who returned the smile without any hint of arrogance. The manager walked away, but before leaving, he shot a quick glance at Kyle, a look that seemed to suggest that he should have made a bit more effort to perceive whom he was dealing with. Without fully understanding what was happening, Kyle felt the weight of an as-yet unknown mistake. He swallowed hard and averted his gaze, trying to push away the uncomfortable feeling settling in his chest. Kyle tried to convince himself that he was overreacting. Maybe the man was just a regular customer, someone the manager had known for a long time. But as his shift continued, he realized that other employees were also looking at him with unusual respect. One of the hostesses murmured something to the waitress beside her, who opened her eyes wide and immediately straightened her posture. One of the bartenders, who generally wasn't fazed by anyone other than bar customers, shot a quick look at the table and adjusted the collar of his uniform. Kyle's irritation grew with each new reaction around him. He knew something was happening, but he still couldn't piece it all together. When the dishes were ready, Kyle approached the table trying to act naturally. He placed the orders in front of each customer, but when he left the steak in front of the man in the blue shirt, he noticed that the conversations around him had diminished. The subtle silence churned his stomach. It was then that one of the table's customers broke the ice, staring at him and saying in a friendly tone, but laden with meaning, "You know who he is, right?" The question hung in the air for a second as Kyle blinked, unresponsive. His mind searched for an answer, but before he could say anything, one of the chefs appeared at the kitchen door, looked at the table and quietly said, "Mr. Preston, it's an honor to have you here again." The name Preston struck Kyle like an electric shock. He looked at the man in front of him, finally realizing what he had done. Marcus Preston, the name now sounded absurdly familiar. He had seen him in the news, in business magazines, maybe even in casual conversation among the restaurant's more influential clients. He wasn't just any businessman. He was one of the tech industry magnates, someone who dictated the course of multi-billion-dollar companies. And Kyle, with his arrogance disguised as spontaneity, had just treated him like any ordinary guy, a salad kind of guy. The weight of the mistake hit his shoulders all at once. He felt a heat rising to his face, his stomach sinking as if falling into an invisible abyss. He tried to cover it up, but his hands were already slightly trembling. Marcus didn't seem remotely offended. He remained calm, slicing the steak unhurriedly, as if none of it mattered. But for Kyle, everything had changed. He felt exposed, vulnerable, a rookie who had just committed a colossal blunder. How could he have been so blind? How had he not realized that he was judging people in the most superficial way possible? Kyle wished he could disappear. His whole body warned him that he had made a grave error, but there was no way to go back. He tried to focus on his breathing, to hide his anxiety, but his mind was in chaos. The restaurant continued functioning around him, waiters running, customers chatting, plates coming out of the kitchen. But for him, everything had taken a back seat. For the first time, he realized how narrow his view of the world had been, how much he had blindly trusted appearances to decide how to treat people. And there was the living proof of his mistake. One of the country's most powerful men sitting at his table without any need to flaunt his status. His first instinct was to flee the situation, but he knew he couldn't. He still had to finish serving the table, act as if nothing had happened. With a slightly more hesitant voice than before, he asked if they needed anything else. Marcus looked up at him, studying his face for a moment. Kyle waited for some comment, some irony, a look of reproach, but none of that came. "I think we're fine, thank you," Marcus replied, politely and without any resentment. The contrast between the businessman's calm and Kyle's inner chaos only made him feel worse. He wished Marcus had shown some frustration. That at least would have eased the overwhelming guilt he felt. Kyle left the table feeling heavier than ever. He continued attending to other tables, but his mind couldn't shake off that mistake. He tried to ignore it, but every glance from his co-workers seemed to carry a silent judgment. Were they discussing his blunder? Had Ethan, the manager, already noticed? He didn't want to be remembered as the waiter who disdained an important customer. But above all, what bothered him most was the realization that this error wasn't accidental. How many times had he judged customers and colleagues by what they wore, by the way they spoke, or by what they ordered from the menu? The realization hit him hard. He was not just a waiter who had made a faux pas. He was someone who, for a long time, had allowed himself to be condescending without even realizing it. It was as if he had been struck by a brutal mirror, showing him a version of himself he preferred not to face. His behavior wasn't just an isolated mistake that night. It was a pattern, and now that he was aware of it, he could no longer ignore it. His chest tightened with shame, but at the same time, there was a growing need inside him. The need to make amends. Not to impress Marcus Preston or restore his reputation, but because, For the first time, he saw himself clearly. With every passing minute, the desire to redeem himself grew in Kyle. He knew that merely reflecting on the mistake wasn't enough. He had to act. But how? Apologizing directly to Marcus seemed terrifying. What if he thought it was just a forced gesture? What if he was already used to people trying to fix their mistakes only because they found out who he was? Kyle didn't want his attitude to come off as opportunistic. He wanted it to be genuine. That's why it took him a while to muster the courage. He watched the table from a distance, waiting for the opportune moment. When he saw that the plates were nearly empty and that the group was beginning to signal that they would ask for the check, he knew it was his last chance. With his heart racing, he took a deep breath and approached the table. His feet felt heavy and his throat was dry. When he stopped in front of Marcus, his voice came out a little lower than usual. "Mr. Preston," he began, feeling every word weigh on him. The businessman looked up, waiting for him to continue. "I just wanted to say that I'm very sorry for my previous comment. It wasn't right of me to assume something about you based solely on my own arrogance. I was disrespectful, and regardless of who you are, I should have treated you with the same respect every customer deserves." He swallowed hard, feeling the tension in the air. He had finally said what he needed to, but he didn't know what to expect in return. For a moment, Marcus just looked at him. The ensuing silence seemed to last an eternity for Kyle, whose heart pounded in his chest. He expected anything, a look of disdain, a curt response, maybe even a sarcastic comment. But when the businessman finally spoke, his voice was calm and firm. "Admitting a mistake isn't easy," he said, placing a neatly folded napkin on the table. Kyle blinked, unsure if that was a direct forgiveness or a lesson in disguise. "The truth is, we've all judged someone at some point without knowing their full story," Marcus continued, now resting his elbows on the table. "What matters is what you do afterward." The response surprised Kyle. He had expected to be reduced to nothing because of his attitude, but instead he received a learning opportunity, and in a way that made him feel even worse. Because it meant that Marcus wasn't just accepting his apology, he was giving him a chance to grow. Kyle nodded, still processing those words, and then stepped back, feeling smaller than ever, but in some way, lighter as well. As he turned to leave, he heard Marcus say something to the others at the table. "He has potential. He just needs to see beyond what he observes." Those words echoed in his mind for the rest of the night. Even after Marcus Preston and his group had left, Kyle couldn't shake those words from his head. He has potential. He just needs to see beyond what he sees. It was strange how a mistake, something that initially filled him with shame, now seemed to be the most important moment of his professional life. For the first time, he wondered how many opportunities he had lost because of his own prejudices. How many times had he treated a customer indifferently just because they didn't seem important? How many connections could he have built but chose not to see? That restaurant, which before had seemed just a place to pass through, suddenly transformed into a learning environment. That night before leaving the restaurant, Kyle sat on one of the benches near the staff exit and stayed there, reflecting. He had never really thought much about his behavior, never forced himself to look at himself in that way. But now he could no longer ignore it. He knew that apologizing had been a first step, but it wasn't enough. If he truly wanted to change, he would have to start acting differently every day. He would have to see each customer, each colleague, as someone who deserved respect, regardless of appearance, clothing, or titles. And for the first time in a long while, he felt a genuine desire to be better. The following week, something changed in Kyle. He didn't mention to his co-workers what had happened with Marcus Preston, but his demeanor began to shift. Instead of watching customers and mentally categorizing them, he started listening more attentively, noticing small details he had previously ignored. When an elderly couple entered and looked at the menu indecisively, he didn't assume they wanted something cheap or simple. He waited, listened, and helped without haste. When a man in a sweatshirt sat alone at the bar, he didn't ignore him as he used to. He asked how his day had been, with no ulterior motives, simply because he wanted to treat him genuinely like any other customer. Over time, that change became noticeable to the other employees. His colleagues observed that he was more patient, more attentive. Even Ethan, the manager, seemed to look at him with a different expression, although he didn't say anything directly. The service in the restaurant continued to be as intense as ever, but now Kyle saw it differently. Each table, each interaction was an opportunity to practice what he had learned. It wasn't that he had become a perfect person overnight. Occasionally, he still felt the old tendency to judge someone by their appearance. But now, he recognized it. And more importantly, he corrected himself before acting on that judgment. A month later, while organizing a tray at the bar, Kyle heard Ethan calling him. The manager rarely addressed him directly, and for a second, Kyle feared it was something bad. But when he approached, he saw that Ethan was holding a small envelope. "This came for you," he said, handing it over without further explanation. Kyle took the envelope with a mix of curiosity and nervousness. There was no sender, only his name written in firm handwriting. He opened it and found inside a small card. Only a brief sentence was written: "Seeing beyond what is visible makes all the difference." Kyle didn't need a signature to know whose it was. An involuntary smile appeared on his face as he held the card. It wasn't just a note, it was a reminder that the impact of his actions went beyond what he could perceive. Marcus Preston didn't need to have sent anything. He could have simply forgotten that encounter and gone on with his life. But in some way, he had taken the trouble to send that message, a silent acknowledgement that Kyle was truly changing. The waiter tucked the card into his pocket, feeling a mix of pride and humility. That experience hadn't transformed him only into a better professional, but into a better person. That night, as he left the restaurant, Kyle walked the streets of Nashville feeling different. Not because he had received a note from a powerful man, but because he knew that that lesson wasn't over yet. He realized that change wasn't a one-time event, but a constant process. Every day, every interaction was a new opportunity to see beyond the obvious, to treat each person with the respect they deserved, without filters or assumptions. He was still the same Kyle, but now he carried with him a consciousness he had never had before. And at that moment, as he felt the city's breeze on his face, he decided that he would never again be the person who once judged others without truly knowing them.